The wind carried the scent of burned wood and rain. In the far corner of the refugee camp, beneath a roof of torn canvas, a boy sat beside his mother, listening to her breath, faint, uneven, like the flicker of a dying candle. Around them, the world had fallen silent. Even the dogs no longer barked. The snow had begun to fall again, thin as dust, covering the ruins with a fragile kind of peace. He was no more than 8, his cheeks hollow from weeks of hunger. Yet in his eyes there was a strange stillness, not of fear, but of waiting. His mother's hand, pale as moonlight, searched for his. Her fingers were trembling, but her touch remained tender. "Elias," she whispered, her voice almost drowned by the wind. "You must remember, nothing truly dies if it's remembered." From the small pocket of her coat, she pulled out a little object wrapped in a piece of cloth. It was a key, no longer shining, a rusted, ordinary thing tied with a thin red thread. But in her hand, it looked sacred. She pressed it into his palm, closing his fingers around it. "When you are ready," she said, her breath breaking, "this will open what's left of me." He didn't understand. His world had always been filled with sudden departures, neighbors, friends, voices that vanished with the night. But the word ready lingered like a promise he could neither accept nor refuse. He looked at the key, then at her eyes, green once, now dimmed by pain, and felt something he couldn't name. Outside, the storm deepened. Tents rattled. The faint cries of other children echoed through the dark. Somewhere far off, a man shouted for firewood. The sound of coughing, boots crunching over ice, the metallic clang of tin cups, all wove into the music of that night. Yet within their little corner, time had folded in on itself. It was only the boy, the woman, and the key. She tried to speak again but couldn't. Her breath turned to small white clouds that dissolved before his eyes. Elias pressed closer, wrapping her in the old wool blanket they shared. "Mama," he whispered, "don't sleep yet." But she smiled faintly, her lips barely moving. "Don't be afraid," she murmured. "You are not alone, even when you think you are." The candlelight beside them quivered, then steadied. For a moment, she seemed peaceful, her gaze fixed on something beyond the broken walls of the camp. Then her eyes drifted closed. The sound that followed wasn't dramatic. It was soft, the quiet departure of a soul who had already been half gone. Elias didn't cry. Not then. He just sat there, listening to the silence fill the space she left behind. The dog outside whined, scratching at the flap of the tent. The snow kept falling, whispering against the canvas like gentle hands trying to comfort him. He lifted her hand, still warm, and placed the key inside it for a moment, as if unsure whether to keep it. Then he pulled it back and tied it around his neck with the red thread. The metal was cold against his chest. All night he sat awake beside her, counting his breaths, afraid that if he closed his eyes, he would forget her face. He remembered the way she used to hum while stirring soup, a melody from before the war, something about sunlight and rivers. He hummed it now, his voice shaking. By dawn, the camp was pale and still. Soldiers moved among the tents, gathering bodies, wrapping them in coarse cloth. Elias watched without sound as they lifted his mother. One of the soldiers noticed the boy but said nothing. Maybe he recognized that kind of silence, the kind that no order could break. When the last body was taken, Elias remained, staring at the empty space she had filled. The candle had melted to nothing but wax and smoke. He picked up the piece of cloth she had wrapped the key in and pressed it to his face. It smelled faintly of lavender. Then, without a word, he stepped outside. The snow reached his ankles, soft and pure. The dog from the night before was waiting, tail low, eyes watchful. Elias looked at him, two wanderers without a map. He whispered, "Come," and the dog followed. Behind them, the camp faded into the white distance, becoming just another place the wind would forget. The key rested against his heart, warm now from his skin. He didn't yet know that it would guide him for years, through hunger, through cold, through every mile of exile, until the day it would finally open what was left of her. But for now, it was just a key. And a boy walking into the snow. When the light came, it wasn't golden. It was gray, thin and tired, like a candle's last smoke rising into the cold air. The refugee camp looked smaller in daylight, the torn tents bending under the weight of new snow. Everything smelled of ash and wet earth. Elias woke to silence. His mother's side of the blanket was empty, the ground beneath still pressed with the shape of her body. The cold had crept into that space, quiet and final. For a long moment, he didn't move. He sat there, knees drawn up, staring at the frozen imprint, as if she might return if he waited long enough. A soldier's voice shouted somewhere near the fire pit. "Move the bodies to the truck." Boots thudded against the snow. Elias pulled the blanket over his head, clutching the key that hung from his neck. The red thread scratched his skin. He could still feel her hand in his, still hear her whisper, "You are not alone." When he finally stepped outside, the morning was a blur of white breath and distant cries. Men with hard faces were carrying shapes wrapped in canvas. The dog, the same one from the night before, sat by the tent flap, tail resting on the snow, ears lowered. It didn't bark, didn't move. It just looked at him with quiet eyes. Elias knew, without being told, that his mother was among those shapes. He wanted to run to her, to tell them to stop, but his voice refused to come. His throat burned. The air itself felt too heavy to breathe. A soldier brushed past him. "Go on, boy," the man muttered. "Nothing left here." The words struck like stones. Nothing left. He watched as the truck doors closed with a hollow clang. The sound echoed across the frozen field, through the broken fences, past the trees stripped bare of their leaves. The truck drove away, carrying with it what little warmth he had ever known. He stood there long after the noise had faded, snowflakes gathering in his hair, his lashes wet not with tears but with frost. The dog nudged his hand. Elias looked down and whispered, "She's gone." The dog tilted its head, then pressed its muzzle against his arm. For the first time, Elias felt something stir, a strange, fragile comfort. He turned back toward the tent. Inside, the floor was scattered with pieces of their life, a tin cup, a broken comb, the torn sleeve of her coat. He picked up the comb and slipped it into his pocket. Then he knelt and gathered the ashes from the candle they'd burned the night before. He poured them into a small tin can and sealed it shut, not because he believed it was sacred, but because it was hers. The wind blew through the camp, lifting the edges of the tents. Somewhere, a child cried. Somewhere else, laughter, brief and nervous, the sound of people trying to forget. Elias stood, the key cold against his heart. He didn't have a plan. Only the thought that he couldn't stay. There was nothing here but ghosts. He began walking. No one stopped him. No one even noticed. He crossed the camp's wooden fence and entered the open fields beyond, a wasteland of snow and broken fences, the remnants of burnt houses half buried in ice. Each step sank deep, his small boots filling with cold. Still, he walked. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, pale and distant, like a memory of warmth. He stopped once to drink from a frozen puddle, the water sharp against his tongue. The dog followed close, its breath forming small clouds that vanished into the wind. By late afternoon, the camp was only a speck behind him. He turned once to look, just once, and saw smoke curling into the sky, soft and gray. He wondered if her soul rose with it. When night began to fall again, he found shelter in what was left of a chapel. The roof had caved in, and the stained glass lay shattered across the stone floor. Only a piece of blue glass remained in the window, glowing faintly in the moonlight. He sat beneath it, pulling the dog close for warmth. From his pocket, he took the key and held it up to the light. It caught the faint reflection of the moon through the blue glass, turning the rusted metal into something almost beautiful. He whispered, "When I'm ready, the words felt strange on his tongue, both promise and prayer. Outside, the snow fell thicker. Through the broken window, he could hear the wind singing through the trees, a low, mournful hum that somehow sounded like her voice. He closed his eyes and imagined her standing beyond the hills, waiting. And in that ruined chapel, with only a dog and a key for company, Elias made a quiet vow: he would keep walking until he found what she had left behind. Whatever it was, a house, a letter, or just a piece of the world where her memory still lived, he would find it. He lay down on the stone floor, the dog curling beside him. The red thread of the key brushed against his skin, warm now from his touch. He whispered a small prayer, the only one he knew: God, don't let her be gone. Not all the way. The night answered with silence, but a gentle silence, not empty, not cruel. The kind that holds space for hope. And for the first time since dawn, Elias slept. The morning after the storm, the sky was the color of smoke. No blue, no sun, only gray stretching endlessly above the frozen hills. Elias stood at the edge of the ruined chapel, looking down the long road that wound through the valley. It was made of mud, ice, and the black powder of things once burned, a road of ash. He took one last look at the shattered cross that still hung above the chapel door. Its wood was splintered, its shape barely holding together. Yet somehow, it still stood. He touched it briefly, a quiet goodbye, then began walking. The dog followed close behind, leaving a second set of tracks in the snow. The wind came from the east, sharp as broken glass. It tore at his clothes, pulled at his hair, and whispered through the empty fields. Sometimes, he thought he heard voices in it, faint, almost kind. Other times, it sounded like the laughter of those who had vanished. Elias walked for hours. The road bent through forests stripped bare, through villages where roofs had fallen and chimneys stood like broken teeth. Smoke no longer rose from them. Only silence. He searched for faces, for movement, for anything alive. But the world had forgotten how to breathe. Once, he found a bicycle half buried in snow, its frame rusted, the wheels bent. Beside it lay a child's shoe. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, then placed it gently on a nearby stone. The dog watched him, tilting its head, and Elias whispered, "Someone loved you too." The key pressed against his chest as he walked, a small reminder of warmth in a world of cold. Sometimes, he would take it out and hold it in his palm, tracing the grooves with his thumb. The red thread had started to fray, but he tied it tighter, whispering a prayer he didn't fully understand. By afternoon, the sky darkened again. Snow began to fall, heavy this time, relentless. He kept walking until he saw the shape of a house ahead, or what was left of one. The roof had collapsed, the door hung crookedly on one hinge. But it was shelter. Inside, the smell of old smoke still lingered. A pot lay overturned beside the cold hearth, and in one corner, a small wooden chair remained upright, as if waiting for someone to return. Elias brushed the snow from it and sat down. His fingers were numb, his lips cracked. The dog curled at his feet, its fur covered in frost. He reached into his pocket and took out the tin can that held the ashes from the candle, her candle. He placed it on the table beside the key and the comb. 3 things: memory, faith, and survival. The wind whistled through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it a faint sound, bells, maybe. Or maybe just metal clinking in the distance. For a heartbeat, Elias thought he saw movement outside. He rose quickly, heart racing, but it was only the snow swirling in the wind. He sank back onto the chair, exhausted. The dog rested its head on his knee. In the flickering gray light, Elias whispered, "If I keep walking, maybe I'll find it. Whatever the key is for." His voice cracked on the last word. Night fell like a heavy curtain. The cold grew unbearable. Elias gathered pieces of broken wood from the house and built a small fire in the hearth. It struggled to catch, then bloomed into trembling light. Shadows danced across the walls, strange, soft shapes that reminded him of his mother's hands. He closed his eyes. The fire crackled, the dog sighed, the wind hummed a hollow tune. For a moment, the pain in his chest eased. He imagined her sitting beside him, just as before, humming the old melody about rivers and sunlight. He could almost smell the lavender again. He whispered into the dark, "If I ever find you again, I'll tell you everything I saw." Outside, the storm calmed. The first stars appeared through the holes in the roof, faint, but real. Elias lifted his head and watched them. For the first time since the camp, he felt something like wonder. When the fire finally died, he lay beside the dog, wrapping his arms around it for warmth. His last thought before sleep was a prayer, silent and clumsy but full of hope, "Let the road lead somewhere." The wind answered, brushing softly against the walls, not in words, but in rhythm, like a heartbeat. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe. It's our dream to reach 1,000 hearts listening to stories of faith and memory. The sun rose pale behind a veil of mist, soft and uncertain, as if afraid to touch the wounded earth. Elias had been walking since dawn, his stomach hollow, his legs trembling. The dog followed close behind, ribs showing beneath its matted fur. Their footsteps made no sound in the snow. By noon, the boy reached the edge of a small village, or what was left of one. Roofs sagged, windows were broken, and a burnt bakery stood at the crossroads, its sign half torn by wind. The air smelled faintly of charcoal and old bread, the ghost of something warm. Elias hesitated, then pushed open the door. It creaked like an old tree. Inside, shelves lay empty, and the counter was coated in ash. A loaf, turned to stone by time, sat on the floor near the hearth. Elias stared at it, torn between hunger and guilt. His hands shook as he picked it up and tried to bite. It crumbled like dust. The taste was bitter, lifeless. He sank to his knees. The dog whined softly, pressing against him. Elias whispered, "There's nothing left." His voice cracked with exhaustion. He wanted to scream but no sound came. Only the quiet rasp of his breathing filled the air. Then, a sound. Footsteps. Slow, steady. He turned sharply. An old man stood in the doorway, wrapped in a heavy brown coat. His beard was white, his face lined like a map of winter survived. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the child with the key, the man with the gaze of someone who had seen too much loss. Elias backed away, clutching the key under his coat. "I'm not stealing," he said quickly, his voice thin and frightened. The man raised a hand. "Easy, boy. I know hunger when I see it." His tone was calm, almost tender. He reached into a cloth bag slung over his shoulder and pulled out half a loaf of bread, still warm. Steam rose from it, carrying the scent of yeast and smoke. Elias froze. The smell filled the entire room, almost dizzying after so many days of emptiness. "Here," the man said, breaking off a piece. "Eat." Elias hesitated. The world had taught him that kindness often came with a price. But the man waited patiently, his eyes kind, his voice steady. Finally, Elias took the bread and tore off a piece. The warmth hit his tongue like sunlight. He ate slowly, each bite a small miracle. The dog licked the crumbs from his hand. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Elias," he whispered. "Good name. I'm Merrick." The man sat on a broken chair by the window, watching him. "You alone out here?" Elias nodded. Marek's gaze softened. "Not anymore." He gestured toward a small stove in the corner. "Come. There's heat still in it. We'll make some tea from melted snow." For the first time in weeks, Elias felt safe enough to move closer to another human being. He helped Merrick gather bits of wood from the floor, feeding the small flame until it grew. The orange light painted the walls with warmth, and for a moment, the bakery looked almost alive again. As they sat together, Merrick spoke little. He poured the melted snow into 2 tin cups, handing one to Elias. "The world takes much from us," he said quietly, staring at the fire, "but not everything. Not kindness. Not faith." Elias sipped the water, his hands trembling from more than cold. He looked at the man's face, the deep lines around his eyes, the way he smiled without reason, as if just sitting here with another soul was enough. When night came, Merrick cleared a corner of the room and laid out 2 old blankets. The dog curled between them. The fire flickered, shadows moving gently across the walls. Elias lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought of his mother. Of her voice, her promise. "When you are ready, this will open what's left of me." He reached for the key around his neck, the red thread faintly glowing in the firelight. Merrick noticed but said nothing. He only murmured, "Keep it close. Some things are not meant to be lost." Elias nodded. The simple words sank deep into his heart. Before sleep took him, he whispered, "Why did you help me?" The man smiled faintly. "Because once, someone helped me." The fire crackled softly. Outside, the snow fell slower now, gentle as ash returning to the ground. In the warmth of that ruined bakery, Elias dreamed for the first time since his mother's death, not of war, or loss, but of light filtering through trees, and the sound of laughter he could almost remember. When he woke the next morning, Merrick was humming an old tune as he fed the fire. Elias recognized it, the same melody his mother used to hum when she cooked. His throat tightened, but he didn't cry. He simply listened, letting the sound wash through him. For the first time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, the world still held traces of love. Winter came like a slow grief, not sudden, but certain. The snow thickened, days shortened, and the world shrank to the size of the small bakery where Elias and Merrick now lived. The roof leaked when it rained, the stove coughed when they fed it too much wood, but within those cracked walls, there was warmth, and even laughter sometimes. Merrick was quiet most days. He moved with the rhythm of someone who had spent too long listening to wind and prayer. He taught Elias small things, how to catch snow for clean water, how to tell when wood was too wet to burn, how to listen to the silence without fearing it. "Silence," Merrick said once, "is not emptiness. It's where God whispers." Elias tried to believe that. On some days, he did. On others, the silence felt too large, a reminder of what was missing. Still, he listened. The dog, whom Merrick had started calling Ash, grew healthy again. Its coat thickened, its tail wagged. It slept by the stove at night, sometimes resting its head on Elias's feet. Watching the animal breathe, Elias often thought of the way his mother's chest had risen and fallen while she slept beside him. That memory, once unbearable, began to feel less like pain and more like a lullaby. One evening, as the wind screamed outside, Merrick handed Elias a crust of bread and said, "We are not meant to live alone forever, you know." Elias frowned. "But there's no one left." "There is always someone left," Merrick replied softly. "Even when you can't see them. Faith is what keeps us walking until we do." The boy nodded but said nothing. Words felt heavy in his throat. Days blurred into weeks. The snow climbed higher, covering the door halfway. Sometimes, they went outside to gather wood, their breaths clouding the air. The world was white and still, even the trees looked frozen in prayer. One morning, Elias woke to find Merrick sitting by the stove, staring at the dying fire. His hands trembled slightly as he reached to add wood. "Are you cold?" Elias asked. Merrick smiled faintly. "Just tired, boy. Winter takes its toll." He tried to stand but sank back into his chair. Elias ran to fetch water, but Merrick stopped him with a gentle touch. "No need," he murmured. "Sit with me instead." The boy sat at his feet, staring at the flickering flame. "You'll be better soon," he said. Merrick chuckled softly. Perhaps. But if not, that's all right too. I've had enough winters to know when one is the last. Elias shook his head fiercely. Don't say that. The old man looked at him, eyes warm. Listen, Elias. The world will not always be this cold. You'll see spring again. You must promise me you'll keep walking. Follow the road, always forward. Tears filled the boy's eyes. I don't know where to go. Merrick smiled. Then go where the key leads. Elias touched the key around his neck, feeling its weight as if for the first time. Marek's gaze softened. That little thing, he said, was given with love. And love, my boy, is the only map worth following. That night, Merrick fell asleep in his chair, his breathing slow and steady. The fire burned low. Elias stayed awake, adding wood now and then, afraid to let the light die. The dog lay beside Marek's feet, head resting on his boots. When dawn came, the light that filled the bakery was thin and silver. The fire had gone out. Elias reached for Marek's shoulder, shaking gently. But the old man did not stir. His face was calm, peaceful. His hand rested on the open pages of a small Bible. Elias stood still for a long time, not crying, not speaking. The silence was deep, the kind Merrick had spoken of. The kind where God whispers. He buried Merrick behind the bakery, where the snow was softest. He marked the grave with 2 stones, one flat, one round. The dog sat beside him, quiet as the falling flakes. Elias whispered, "Thank you," though he wasn't sure who he was thanking, Merrick, his mother, or God himself. That night, he built one last fire. He sat by it, holding the key, the red thread now faded but strong. He remembered Marek's last words, "Follow the road. Always forward." The next morning, he packed a small bundle, the tin can with the candle ashes, the comb, a piece of bread, and Marek's Bible. He tied them together with a strip of cloth. Before leaving, he looked back once at the bakery, the place that had become his first home since losing her. Smoke from the last fire drifted through the hole in the roof, curling upward into the pale sky. Elias whispered, "Goodbye, old friend." Then he turned toward the horizon. The snow had begun to melt in thin silver streams that glistened in the morning sun. Somewhere far away, he thought he could hear running water, a sign of life returning. Ash trotted beside him. The boy's breath fogged in the air, the key tapping softly against his chest with every step. The winter of silence was ending. And though the world was still cold, a faint warmth had begun to grow inside him, the kind that comes not from fire, but from faith. The snow began to fade with the turning of the days. Streams carved silver lines through the ice, and the air softened, carrying the scent of thawed earth. For the first time in months, Elias could hear birds again, faint, uncertain notes that trembled like hope learning to sing. He had walked for many days since leaving Marek's bakery. Each dawn looked the same, a sky of dull light, a road of frozen mud, a horizon that refused to come closer. Yet something inside him had changed. He no longer walked to escape, he walked to arrive. The dog, Ash, trotted beside him, sometimes running ahead to chase shadows, sometimes falling behind to rest. Elias spoke to him often, not because he expected answers, but because silence no longer frightened him. "We'll find something soon," he would whisper. "Maybe a town. Maybe, her." The land around them grew wilder. Hills rose and fell like the backs of sleeping giants. The road, long since broken, turned into a trail of stones and roots that led into the forest. Elias followed it, the key resting against his chest like a compass of faith. By the 3rd day, clouds gathered again, heavy and low. The wind changed, cooler, older, carrying the faint sound of running water. He followed it, climbing a ridge slick with moss. When he reached the top, he stopped. Before him stretched a valley hidden by mist and time. It was unlike anything he had seen, a hollow of green tucked between mountains, untouched by war. A stream glimmered at its heart, winding between clusters of trees. Birds circled above, and the air smelled of pine and something sweet, lavender. Elias's breath caught. He knelt, gripping the earth with trembling hands. It felt warm. Real. Alive. Ash barked once, tail wagging. The sound echoed softly through the valley, and for a moment Elias thought he heard another bark answer, faint, far below. He smiled. "We're not alone," he whispered. They descended slowly, the path narrow and steep. The boy slipped once, catching himself on a root. Mud streaked his coat, but he didn't care. When they reached the bottom, the ground was soft and damp. Wildflowers peeked through the moss, and the stream sang quietly as it ran over stones. He cupped his hands and drank. The water was cold, clean, alive. As he drank, he noticed something, a faint trail leading deeper into the valley, half hidden beneath the undergrowth. It wasn't made by animals, it was too straight, too deliberate. He followed it. The path wound through the trees, leading to an open clearing where the remains of a small village lay hidden beneath vines. Moss-covered rooftops, broken fences, and stone chimneys peeked through the green. The air was still, but not dead, as if the place had only been sleeping. Elias stepped closer. The sound of his boots on the old wooden boards echoed faintly. Birds fluttered away from the trees. Ash sniffed the air, tail lowered. The boy's heart pounded. He couldn't explain it, but something in this valley felt familiar. A scent, a sound, something whispered from the edge of memory. He walked among the ruins, tracing the outlines of houses long gone. Then he saw it, a small wooden bridge crossing the stream. Its railing was broken, its planks soft with rot. Beyond it stood a narrow path leading up to a house with a blue door. Elias stopped. His breath caught. The door's color, faded but distinct, struck something deep within him. He had seen that blue before, not in dreams, not in passing, but in a memory half buried beneath years of snow. His hands trembled. He reached for the key under his coat, the red thread frayed but unbroken. The metal felt warmer now, almost alive. He took a hesitant step toward the house. The wind picked up, carrying the faintest trace of lavender again. The same scent that had clung to his mother's coat, to her hair when she hugged him goodnight. Ash barked softly, as if urging him forward. Elias walked. Each step felt like walking through time, through every night he'd prayed, every mile he'd survived. He reached the door, his shadow trembling against the wood. The blue paint was chipped, revealing the grain beneath. A small cross was carved near the handle, worn down by years of touch. He raised his hand to knock but stopped. The key. He held it up. It fit the lock perfectly. For a long time, he didn't move. The world seemed to hold its breath. Wind rustled the trees. The stream whispered below. The key trembled between his fingers. He whispered, "When you are ready," then he placed it in the lock. It turned with a soft click, smooth, as if it had been waiting all these years just for this moment. He pushed the door open. The hinges groaned, and the scent of dust and lavender filled the air. Inside, the light was dim, but warm. The air felt untouched by time, heavy with memory. A single chair sat by the window. A scarf hung from a nail near the door, faded, but unmistakably hers. Elias stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath his feet. Ash followed, tail low, ears pricked. The boy turned slowly, eyes wide, heart racing. He had found it. Whatever his mother had left, it was here. Waiting. And in that moment, the long road, the hunger, the silence, all of it felt like one long prayer finally answered. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe. It's our dream to reach 1,000 hearts listening to stories of faith and memory. The air inside the house was thick with stillness. Dust floated through the pale light that crept in from a single cracked window. Each mote drifted like a slow snowflake suspended in time. Elias stood just inside the doorway, afraid to move. The floorboards groaned faintly beneath his boots, as if the house itself was waking from a long sleep. Ash sniffed the corners, his claws tapping softly against the wood. The faint smell of lavender still lingered, not fresh, but ghostly, like a perfume carried by memory rather than air. Elias stepped forward, his eyes tracing the outlines of the room. The walls were bare except for a wooden crucifix that hung crooked above the hearth. A faded scarf lay draped across a chair, its edges frayed, its pattern faint, but the blue and red threads were unmistakable. He reached out, fingers trembling, and brushed the cloth. It was cold but familiar. He remembered it, his mother wrapping it around her neck on the morning before the camp, the way it fluttered in the wind as she waved goodbye to someone he couldn't remember now. The boy swallowed hard. "Mama," he whispered, though the house didn't answer. He moved slowly from room to room. Each was small, plain, a bed with a quilt eaten by moths, a table with one leg broken, a shelf holding 3 cracked cups. Everything bore the weight of years, but nothing felt abandoned. It was as if the house had simply been waiting. He found a mirror near the bed, its glass clouded and spotted. When he looked into it, he saw himself, thinner, older than he should be, his eyes too heavy for a child. But behind him, reflected faintly, the room glowed with the soft light of afternoon. It almost looked warm. He turned away quickly, breathing shallowly. The key still hung from his neck, its weight different now, not a question anymore, but a door itself. In the corner of the main room stood an old chest, low and wide, half covered by a piece of torn cloth. It was carved with flowers, the same pattern his mother used to trace with her finger when telling him stories by candlelight. Elias froze. The shape, the curve of the carvings, he knew them. He pulled the cloth away. The chest was locked, a small keyhole glinting in the light. His heart raced. The key. He dropped to his knees, hands shaking. Ash came to his side, watching silently. Elias took the key from around his neck, the red thread slipping loose from the knot. He held it in front of him. It was rusted, small, ordinary, yet it seemed to hum faintly in his palm. He could almost hear her voice again, "When you are ready, this will open what's left of me." He took a deep breath and placed the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. He turned it, click. The sound echoed through the quiet house like a heartbeat. He lifted the lid slowly. The hinges groaned, dust rising in the dim light. Inside lay bundles wrapped in cloth, each tied with thin ribbons. The smell of old paper and faint lavender rose up to meet him. He pulled out the first bundle and untied it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, folded neatly, some with edges singed, others with ink faded to brown. On the top letter, in handwriting he could never forget, was his name. Elias. His vision blurred. He pressed the letter to his chest before opening it. The paper was fragile, but her words were clear. "My son, if you are reading this, it means you lived. That alone is my greatest prayer answered. The key I gave you was not to this chest, but to memory, to remind you that love survives even when we do not. What you find here is only what I could save from the world's fire. The rest lives in you." Elias bowed his head. The tears came silently, falling onto the paper like rain returning to the sea. He read until the light faded. Letter after letter, each one a fragment of her voice, her dreams, her faith. She wrote of the house, of the valley, of the people who once lived here and the laughter that once filled these rooms. She wrote of God, of mercy, of forgiveness. And she wrote of him, always of him. When the last light slipped from the window, Elias placed the letters back into the chest, his heart trembling with something larger than grief. It was as if he had been carried across years of darkness only to arrive in the very place where light had first begun. He knelt before the open chest, hands clasped, whispering, "Thank you." The wind rose outside, brushing through the cracks in the window, moving softly through the scarf on the chair. It swayed gently, as if an unseen hand had touched it. Ash barked once, low and calm, and lay down near the fire pit. Elias sat by the window, looking out at the fading sky. The valley below glowed silver in the moonlight. He could see the stream, the bridge, the path that had brought him here. Everything shimmered with quiet meaning. The blue door, slightly ajar, creaked as the wind passed through it, not mournfully, but like a sigh of peace. And in that sound, Elias thought he heard her voice again, soft as prayer, "You are home, my child." He closed his eyes, letting the words settle deep inside him. For the first time since the war, he smiled. The night after finding his mother's letters, Elias could not sleep. The wind moved softly through the cracks of the old house, carrying the sound of branches brushing against the roof. Each sigh of the wind seemed to echo her voice, every creak in the floor a reminder that something here was still alive, waiting. He sat by the fire pit long after the flames had faded, staring into the glowing embers. Ash lay beside him, tail curled, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The letters rested on the table, bundled carefully in the cloth they came in. Elias had read them all, but one remained at the bottom of the chest, smaller, sealed with red wax. The wax was cracked, but the mark upon it was clear, a tiny cross pressed into the seal. He hesitated before breaking it. Inside, the paper was thin and brittle, the ink faded almost to dust. Yet the words still breathed, "My dearest Elias, if you have come this far, then you have found the house. But there is more, something beneath what you can see. Beneath this home lies the last piece of who we were. I hid it so that what was meant for destruction would remain untouched. When you are ready, follow the sound of the floor that remembers our footsteps. There you will find what must never be lost." His heart raced. He looked around the small room, the floorboards old and uneven. Which one, he wondered, remembered them? He rose slowly, holding the candle near the ground. The flame danced across the boards, flickering with the rhythm of his breath. Each board groaned under his weight, until one, near the far corner by the window, gave a sound different from the rest. A hollow thump. Elias knelt. He brushed away the dust and felt the seam between two boards. The key, her key, still hung around his neck. He slipped it into the narrow crack and lifted gently. The board came loose with a dry groan, revealing a small hollow space beneath. The air that rose from it smelled faintly of cedar and earth, untouched by time. He lowered the candle and saw a small wooden box hidden below, bound with a strip of red cloth. His breath caught. He reached down, hands trembling, and pulled the box into the light. It was simple, dark wood, smooth from age, but carved with the same floral patterns as the larger chest. He untied the cloth, heart pounding. The lid creaked open. Inside, wrapped carefully in linen, lay three things: a small wooden cross, a photograph, and a leather-bound book. He lifted the cross first. The wood was worn smooth where fingers had once held it in prayer. He turned it in his hands, recognizing the small crack near the top, his mother's cross, the one she used to keep near her bed. He pressed it to his lips. "Thank you," he whispered. Then he picked up the photograph. It was faded, the edges curled, but the image still clear, a woman and a man standing in front of this very house, sunlight falling across their faces. She held a small child in her arms. Her hair, dark and wavy, caught the light. The man's hand rested gently on her shoulder. Elias stared at them, his throat tight. The child, the small boy in the woman's arms, was him. His fingers trembled. He traced the outline of her face, of his father's hand. Until that moment, he could barely remember his father at all, only the scent of tobacco, the sound of boots by the door. But here he was, smiling, alive. Elias set the photo down and reached for the last object, the leather-bound book. It was small, tied shut with a faded ribbon. On the cover, pressed into the leather, was a single word, faith. He untied the ribbon and opened it. Inside were pages filled with her handwriting, not letters this time, but prayers, thoughts, small pieces of her heart written between days of fear and hope. He read, "When the world burns, let our hearts remain lighted candles. Let my son remember that even when I am gone, the fire in him is not." Another entry read, "If I never see the spring again, I pray he will. And when he does, may he plant something beautiful, so that life remembers we were here." Tears fell freely now. Elias turned the pages slowly, afraid to reach the end. When he did, he found one final line written in shaky ink, "This house is not your burden, my child, it is your beginning." He closed the book gently, holding it against his chest. The fire behind him flickered weakly, the candle almost burned out. Ash lifted his head and whined softly, sensing the boy's trembling. Elias looked around the room, the walls, the worn floor, the simple furniture. All of it seemed to glow faintly now, as if her words had woken something inside the house itself. He placed the cross back into the box, along with the book and the photograph, and then set the board carefully over the hollow space again. But this time, he marked the spot, a small carving of a heart and a cross intertwined. Outside, dawn began to touch the sky. The first light crept through the cracks in the shutters, painting the room gold. Elias stood, the key still in his hand, warm from his touch. He whispered to the empty house, "I found what was left of you." And as if in answer, the wind outside shifted, soft and gentle, carrying the scent of lavender once more. He closed his eyes and smiled. The morning after Elias uncovered the hidden box, the valley lay wrapped in mist. The mountains beyond were invisible, swallowed by a soft gray that seemed to breathe. The world was silent except for the slow drip of melting frost from the roof. Inside the house, the air was warmer than before, as if something unseen had rekindled its heart. Elias sat at the table, the leather-bound book open before him. The candle had burned low, but he didn't need the light, he knew the words by heart now. He had read them through the night, each prayer sinking deeper into him until it felt as if his mother was sitting across from him, her voice steady and kind, her eyes full of the same patient faith that had carried them through the years. Ash lay curled near the hearth, tail twitching in dreams. The letters from the chest were stacked beside the book, neatly arranged, their corners weighed down by a small stone so the wind wouldn't scatter them. Elias picked up the last letter, the one he hadn't read yet. It was sealed in the same red wax as before, though this one bore no cross, only the imprint of a simple key. His hand trembled as he broke the seal. The paper unfolded easily, as though it had been waiting for this moment. "My dear Elias, if you have found this letter, then you have already opened the chest and seen what was hidden beneath. I have no more secrets, only truth. You were not born into the ruins, my son, you were born into love. The house you stand in was built by your father's hands. He was taken from us before you could remember him, but every beam of this home carries his care, every wall his prayer for us to be safe." Elias stopped reading. His breath caught. He looked around the room, at the worn beams, the rough stones near the hearth, and touched the wall gently, as though he could feel his father's fingerprints still pressed into the grain. He continued. "When the soldiers came, I could not save the house. But I could save you. The key I gave you was never meant to guard wood or paper, it was meant to keep your heart open. When all else is lost, open it. Let it remind you that home is not a place, it is something we carry within." The letters blurred before his eyes. He wiped his face with his sleeve, his heart aching but full. He turned the page. "If you ever feel alone, look around you. You will see us in the things that live, in the river's song, in the breath of the dog who follows you, in the warmth of fire and the kindness of strangers. We never left, my child. Love cannot leave." His hand covered his mouth. For a long moment, he couldn't breathe. The letter trembled in his fingers as tears fell onto the ink, blurring the words into small rivers. Then, as if answering that moment of breaking, a sound filled the room, faint, clear, like the first note of a forgotten hymn. Elias looked up. It was the wind, but it wasn't the same as before. It hummed softly through the window cracks, stirring the scarf on the chair. The scarf lifted, swaying gently, then fell again. And beneath it, something glinted. Elias blinked, wiped his tears, and leaned closer. Beneath the scarf lay a small metal pendant shaped like a dove. It must have been hidden there for years, tangled in the cloth. He picked it up. The chain was broken, but the pendant itself was whole. He turned it over. On the back, engraved in tiny, careful letters, were 2 words, "Faith lives." His breath shuddered. He held it tightly in his palm. At that exact moment, the clouds outside shifted. Sunlight, real, golden sunlight, pierced through the mist and poured through the window, flooding the small room with warmth. It struck the table, the letters, the cross, the photograph, everything that had survived. Elias closed his eyes, feeling the light touch his face. It felt like her hands again, brushing away the frost from his cheeks, whispering forgiveness over all the years he'd spent wandering. He knelt by the window, pendant still in his palm, and whispered, "I found you." Outside, the valley shimmered. Snow melted from the branches. A single bird, the first he had seen this close, landed on the windowsill. Its feathers were white, its eyes bright with life. It tilted its head, as if listening, then sang a soft, trembling note. Ash lifted his head and wagged his tail once. Elias smiled through tears. "You see her too, don't you?" The bird sang again and flew toward the stream, disappearing into the sunlight. Elias rose and opened the window. The scent of lavender and wet earth filled the house. He looked out at the valley, the bridge, the trees, the distant hills, and for the first time, he didn't see ruins. He saw promise. He placed the pendant beside the letters and whispered, "I'll stay. I'll keep this place alive." The wind swept gently through the doorway, carrying with it the faint echo of a woman's voice, not in words, but in warmth, in light. And in that moment, Elias understood the miracle. The key had never been meant to open a door, or a box, or a floor. It had been meant to open him. If this story touches your heart, please subscribe. It's our dream to reach 1,000 hearts listening to stories of faith and memory. Spring did not arrive all at once. It crept into the valley quietly, almost shyly, as if afraid to disturb the stillness that grief had built. The snow melted in slow sighs, pooling into the stream that ran beside the blue-doored house. The air grew softer. The birds returned, one by one. And the house, long silent, long waiting, began to live again. Elias woke each morning to the sound of running water and the distant hum of wings. The house no longer felt like a tomb of memories but like a heart, old, scarred, yet still beating. He swept the dust from the floors, repaired the cracks in the walls with pieces of wood he scavenged from the abandoned houses nearby, and patched the roof with care, one shingle at a time. Each task became a prayer. When he rebuilt the fence, he whispered his father's name. When he planted the small lavender seeds he found in a jar behind the cupboard, he whispered his mother's. Ash followed him everywhere, guarding, watching, sometimes simply lying in the sunlight, tail tapping gently against the earth. Together they worked, the boy and the dog, turning ruin into home. By mid-season, the valley was green again. Grass crept through the cracks in the old stones. Flowers grew wild around the bridge. The wind that once howled now sang. And in the evenings, when Elias lit the fire, the smoke curled upward, not like a cry, but like a blessing. Sometimes he would sit at the table, reading his mother's book of prayers aloud. His voice was still soft, but it no longer trembled. He added his own words to the margins, not elegant, but honest. "Thank you for another day. Thank you for the road that brought me here. Thank you for the ones I still carry in my heart." Months passed. The house became a refuge not just for him. One day, while walking near the old bridge, Elias saw movement among the trees, small figures, thin and cautious. Refugee children, no older than he had been when the war took everything. They watched him from the shadows, eyes wary. He called out softly, "You can come here. There's bread." They didn't move at first. But when he placed the loaf on the bridge and stepped back, the youngest approached, trembling. Then another. Then all of them, 4 in total. They followed him home that evening. He gave them water, blankets, a share of the food he'd gathered. Ash wagged his tail and guarded them as though he understood. That night, as the children slept near the hearth, Elias sat by the window and looked out at the stars. The house was full of sound again, quiet breathing, the shifting of blankets, the soft murmur of dreams. He smiled. "This is what you meant, isn't it?" he whispered to the air. "That love must be passed on." The wind stirred gently through the open window, carrying the scent of lavender. Days turned into weeks, and the house transformed once more. Laughter echoed through the rooms. The children helped him repair the garden fence, gather berries, and carry wood from the forest. They began to call him Brother Elias. He taught them what Merrick had taught him, how to light a fire, how to listen to silence, how to trust kindness again. And sometimes, when he read aloud from his mother's journal, they listened with wide eyes, as if her voice spoke through him. By summer, the blue-doored house had become more than shelter. It was a home, a small orphanage hidden deep in the valley, known only to those who needed it. Birds nested under the eaves. The garden bloomed with lavender, its fragrance drifting down to the stream. Elias had grown taller now, his face older, his eyes steady. He no longer looked like the frightened child who once walked the road of ash. The world had marked him, yes, but it had not taken him. It had made him into something else, a keeper of hope. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Elias stood outside watching the children chase each other through the grass. The light bathed everything in gold. The house behind him glowed like something reborn. He took the key from his pocket, the same key that had once hung around his neck, the one that had led him here. It was worn now, its red thread faded to pink. He held it in his palm, then hung it on a nail beside the door. "Your work is done," he whispered. The breeze moved softly through the valley, and for a brief moment, he thought he heard her laughter, light, distant, full of peace. Elias lifted his face to the sky. The stars were just beginning to appear, one by one. He pressed his hand over his heart and murmured, "I'm home." Inside, the children's laughter filled the air. Ash barked once, joyfully. The scent of lavender drifted from the garden. And as the last light of day touched the blue door, the house, once buried in silence, stood alive again, a living prayer built from faith, memory, and love. Morning light spilled softly across the valley, golden and gentle. The world that had once been made of ash and silence now sang with the hum of bees and the laughter of children. The blue-doored house glowed beneath the sun, its chimney breathing a thin ribbon of smoke that curled into the sky. Elias stood outside, barefoot on the damp grass, listening. The sounds of life surrounded him, the clatter of wooden bowls from inside, the creak of the garden gate, Ash barking in the distance as he chased after the youngest boy. But beyond all that, beneath the ordinary noise of living, he heard it, the wind. It was different now. Softer, warmer, almost familiar. It moved through the lavender fields with purpose, brushing past him like a touch. He closed his eyes. "I remember this sound," he whispered. The same wind had once howled through the broken tents of the camp. It had swept across the frozen road of ash, carried his mother's last breath, and sung through the rafters of Marek's old bakery. And now it had returned, not to destroy, but to bless. Inside the house, the children were preparing breakfast. Elias could hear them arguing softly over who would stir the pot of porridge, their laughter spilling through the open window. He smiled, then turned toward the mountains. They were bright today, streaked with green where snow had once ruled. Waterfalls shimmered in the distance like threads of silver light. Between them, the sky opened wide and blue, endless as hope. He walked to the garden. The lavender he had planted months ago was in full bloom. Each flower leaned gently in the wind, their scent rising sweet and holy. Elias knelt and brushed his fingers along the petals. "You made it," he murmured. "You came back to life." The breeze swelled. A strand of hair fell over his eyes. When he looked up, something red caught his attention, a thread, fluttering gently near the old fence. He stood and walked toward it. It was a piece of the red string, her string, the one that had once held the key around his neck. It dangled from a branch of lavender, twisting in the wind like a ribbon of memory. Elias reached out, tears already forming before he understood why. He held the thread gently between his fingers. It was weathered, faded, yet somehow whole. A breath of wind rose, soft at first, then stronger. It swept across the valley, rustling the trees, lifting the scent of lavender into the air. The children paused their play and looked up as petals and grass swirled in circles, glowing in the sunlight. Elias stood still, his coat flapping lightly against his legs. He felt the wind press against his chest, his face, his hands, not cold, not harsh, but alive. And in that wind, he heard her. Not in words, but in a voice felt deeper than sound, a warmth that reached the center of him. "You kept the promise, my son." His eyes closed. The world fell away, only light, scent, wind, and love remained. A tear rolled down his cheek, carried away before it could fall. He whispered, "I never forgot you." The red thread slipped from his fingers and danced away, carried upward by the breeze. It rose higher and higher until it disappeared into the light above the valley. A single dove, white as snow, circled once overhead, then landed softly on the windowsill of the blue door. The children gasped and ran to see. The bird tilted its head, calm and unafraid, watching Elias with eyes that seemed to know him. He smiled. "You came back too." The dove cooed softly, then lifted off again, flying toward the mountains, toward the light. The wind began to calm. The petals settled. The world returned to stillness, but something within Elias had changed. He felt lighter, as if the years of loss had finally exhaled and given way to peace. He turned toward the house. The children were waving at him from the window, faces bright with joy. "Brother Elias. Come eat," one shouted. He nodded, laughing softly, and walked back toward them. As he reached the doorway, he paused and looked back once more at the valley, at the stream, the bridge, the fields of lavender glowing in the sun. The wind stirred again, a gentle sigh brushing his hair. And for the first time, he didn't feel it as a reminder of what was gone, but as a blessing of what remained. He whispered, "I know. You're here." Then he stepped inside. The door, the same blue door that had once waited in silence, closed softly behind him, the sound warm and final, like the closing of a prayer. Outside, the wind moved on, carrying with it the scent of lavender and the laughter of children, spreading them across the valley like seeds. And above it all, the sky, endless and clear, seemed to smile. The valley slept in quiet grace. The sky above was vast and tender, streaked with gold as the sun began its slow descent behind the mountains. Evening was coming, the kind of evening that makes you stop and breathe, not because of its beauty, but because of the memory it carries. Elias stood on the small hill behind the house, the same place he had first seen the blue door months ago. The lavender fields below glowed faintly in the fading light, swaying like waves in a soft sea. The air smelled of smoke and honey, of soil and new life. He had rebuilt much, the house, the garden, even himself. And yet, as he stood there, he felt no pride, no victory, only gratitude. Gratitude for the road that had broken him, because it had also led him home. The children were playing near the stream, their laughter carried by the wind that had once brought only loss. Ash sat beside them, tail wagging, keeping gentle watch. Every sound from below felt like a hymn, one he had heard before but never truly understood until now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden cross from the hidden box. Its edges were worn smooth, the wood dark from years of touch. He held it up toward the light. The sunset glowed through it, setting the cross aflame with color, crimson, amber, and gold. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he began to speak, not to the sky, not to the valley, but to her. "Mama," he whispered, "I used to think you left me with nothing. Just a key. Just silence. But now I see, you left me everything. You left me the strength to walk, the heart to forgive, and the faith to see beauty where the world said there was none." He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "You left me this home. These children. This peace." The wind answered, moving through the lavender fields like a sigh of love. He turned the cross over in his hand and looked toward the mountains. The last light touched their peaks, turning them silver. He could almost see her standing there, her figure soft and radiant, the red thread still tied around her wrist. He whispered, "You can rest now. I'm not lost anymore." The wind lifted his hair, gentle and warm. For a moment, it felt like her hand again, light against his cheek. He knelt and planted the cross in the soil before him, pressing it deep into the earth. Around it, lavender grew in soft circles, its scent rising in the cool air. "Let this be your place," he murmured. "Where memory becomes life again." As he stood, he noticed something glimmering between the flowers. It was the pendant, the tiny dove engraved with the words "Faith Lives." He picked it up and hung it gently around the cross. The sunlight caught it, sending a soft glow across the field. The world around him grew still. No wind now, no sound. Only peace. And in that silence, Elias understood what his journey had always been, not an escape from pain, but a return to purpose. Not a story of loss, but of resurrection. He turned back toward the house. The children were waving for him to come. Supper was ready. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling upward like a quiet prayer. He smiled, heart full, eyes soft with joy. As he walked down the hill, he thought of Marek's words, "Silence is where God whispers." Now he knew what they meant. For all the years of wandering, God had not been silent. He had been speaking, in the crackle of every fire, in the kindness of every stranger, in every breath that carried him forward. And now, finally, Elias could hear him clearly. When he reached the door, he paused once more and looked back at the valley. The lavender swayed, the cross gleamed, and the faint echo of his mother's lullaby floated on the evening wind. He smiled. "Thank you." Then he stepped inside, closing the blue door gently behind him. The sound was soft, the sound of completion. Inside, laughter filled the rooms, and warmth danced across the walls. The house, once a monument to loss, now lived as a beacon of love. Outside, night fell over the valley like a blessing. Stars emerged, one, then many, until the sky was full of them, each one shining like a promise kept. And through the dark, the wind moved again, carrying her final whisper, "The key was never to the house, my son. It was to your heart." If this story touched your heart, please subscribe. It's our dream to reach 1,000 hearts listening to stories of faith and memory. Comment below where you're watching from, your story matters too.